The sun was barely up over Willow Creek, that quiet suburban neighborhood tucked behind the pines just outside of Charlotte, North Carolina. Birds chirped, sprinklers hissed, and the scent of freshly cut grass hung thick in the air. Everything seemed perfect, the kind of perfect that only existed in neighborhoods where the HOA watched every blade of grass. Mark Bennett stepped out onto his porch, coffee mug in hand, taking in the morning calm. His two-story house was painted a deep forest green, the same color his father had painted it before handing it down. To Mark, it wasn't just a house. It was memory. It was legacy. But this morning, the calm broke. A white SUV rolled slowly down the street, stopping every few houses. Behind the wheel sat her, Karen Fields, the self-appointed queen of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association. Her blonde bob glinted like polished steel in the sun, her oversized sunglasses reflecting the neighborhood she ruled with manicured precision. She pulled up in front of Mark's house, scribbled something on her clipboard, and gave a curt smile. The kind that said, "You're about to get a letter." Mark sighed. "What now?" he muttered. Later that afternoon, the envelope arrived, crisp, white, and stamped with the HOA's embossed logo. He tore it open and read aloud, voice flat. Effective immediately, all homes in Willow Creek must conform to the new neighborhood color palette approved by the HOA board. All exterior paint must be changed to sand beige number 42 by August 15th. Failure to comply will result in daily fines of $250. Mark froze. "You've got to be kidding me." His wife, Jenna, looked up from her laptop. "She's making everyone paint their houses beige? What about the blue one at the corner?" "Doesn't matter," Mark said bitterly. "Karen's calling the shots now." The next day, at the HOA meeting in the community hall, the tension was palpable. Karen stood at the front like a school principal addressing disobedient children. Behind her hung a glossy poster of houses, all painted the same dull beige. "Uniformity," she declared, voice crisp as ice. "That's what keeps property values high. We must look cohesive." Mark raised his hand. "So, let me get this straight. You're forcing everyone to repaint their homes just because you think beige looks good?" Karen's smile was thin. "It's not about what I think. It's about maintaining the standards of Willow Creek." A murmur swept the room. Some nodded in fearful agreement. Others exchanged defiant looks. When the meeting ended, Mark stood outside with his neighbor, Miguel, who owned the bright blue house at the corner. "She's gone too far this time," Miguel said, shaking his head. "First it was mailbox height. Then it was lawn decor. Now this." Mark looked back at Karen's SUV pulling away, her clipboard glinting through the window. "Yeah," he said quietly, "and I'm not painting over my father's house for her." That night, Mark stood on his porch again, staring at the green paint under the porch light, the last bit of individuality left on the block. He didn't know it yet, but the coming weeks would turn this quiet neighborhood into a war zone, not of bullets and smoke, but of pride, control, and paint rollers. By the next week, the neighborhood had turned into something out of a Stepford nightmare. Trucks rumbled in and out of driveways, carrying gallons of sand beige number 42. Painters in white overalls marched up and down the street like soldiers. The sound of rollers scraping against walls filled the air from sunrise to sundown. One by one, the colorful houses of Willow Creek faded into uniform blandness. Except for two. Mark's deep green colonial and Miguel's blue cottage stood like rebels in a sea of beige. Karen's SUV passed them daily, slowing down as she jotted notes, her expression tightening with each drive-by. The HOA newsletter soon arrived in everyone's mailbox, its headline bold and unmistakable. Community Standards Reminder. Noncompliance will not be tolerated. The article even featured two photos, Mark's and Miguel's homes, circled in red like wanted posters. Mark slammed the paper down. "She's turned this into a witch hunt." Jenna tried to reason with him. "Maybe just paint it, Mark. We'll keep the old color on the inside. You don't need the stress." But he couldn't. Every corner of that house meant something. His father sanding those porch rails, his mother hanging the wind chimes, his first Christmas with Jenna on that very lawn. Painting over it felt like erasing his past. The fines started rolling in. $250 a day. By the end of week one, the total had hit $1,750. The HOA letters became colder, more legal. Words like escalation and liens began to appear. Still, Mark refused. One evening, Miguel came over holding 2 beers. Man, she's out of control, he said, sitting on Mark's steps. She fined me for my mailbox being the wrong shade of blue. The mailbox, bro. Mark chuckled bitterly. She's drunk on power. Miguel took a long sip and stared at the row of beige houses. You know what? We should fight back. Not just pay lawyers, actually show her what we think. That night, as the moon climbed high over Willow Creek, a quiet rebellion took shape. They started small. Miguel printed flyers that read, "Keep Willow Creek colorful," and slipped them under doors at midnight. By morning, half the neighborhood had seen them. Karen tore everyone down, but the idea had already spread. Soon, little acts of defiance began appearing, a red birdhouse here, a teal porch swing there. Someone even spray-painted a smiley face on a beige fence. It wasn't much, but it was a spark. Karen's response was swift. The next morning, she marched through the street in her power heels, clipboard in hand, snapping photos and barking orders to her assistant. Every infraction documented. I want citations on every non-approved color. By afternoon, the HOA posted new notices. Unauthorized exterior colors will result in additional fines. Mark stood at his window, watching her hammer the notice into his lawn. He stepped outside. "Karen," he called. She turned, smiling with that polished condescension. "Oh, Mark, I was just dropping this off personally. You're quite the celebrity these days. You're destroying this neighborhood," he said, his voice tight. "People used to care here. Now they're just scared of you." Karen's sunglasses reflected him like a distorted mirror. "Rules keep order, Mark. Without them, everything falls apart." She got back in her SUV, leaving the smell of perfume and exhaust in her wake. That night, as thunder rolled in and rain streaked the windows, Mark stood in his living room staring at the fine notices spread across the table. He felt anger, helplessness, but also resolve. He knew what he had to do. He wasn't going to back down. Not this time. The storm had passed, but something darker hung over Willow Creek. The streets were eerily quiet, the beige houses glistening with rainwater under a cold, silver dawn. Mark woke up early, his stomach tight with frustration. The fines had ballooned to nearly $5,000. His savings were draining, his patience long gone. And yet, the house still stood, defiantly green, like a single tree in a forest of cardboard boxes. That morning, Karen struck again. He heard the knock, sharp, deliberate, authoritative. When he opened the door, Karen was standing there, clipboard in hand, 2 men beside her in city-issued windbreakers. "Code enforcement officers." "Mr. Bennett," she said smoothly, "this is your final notice. You're in direct violation of HOA Regulation 5.1.3. You've ignored multiple citations. These gentlemen are here to document the infraction for legal action." Mark stared at her. "You brought city inspectors to my door because you don't like my paint?" Karen smiled, adjusting her sunglasses. "It's not my preference, Mark. It's the community's standard." He could feel heat rising behind his eyes. "You are the community now, huh?" Jenna appeared behind him, her voice trembling. "Karen, please. We've lived here for years. Can't you make an exception?" Karen's tone turned syrupy. "I'm afraid not. Exceptions become loopholes, and loopholes destroy property values." The inspectors began snapping photos of the house. Mark clenched his fists, his voice shaking. "This is harassment." Karen tilted her head. "This is order." Then she handed him one last paper, a cease and desist letter, signed by the HOA board. "You have 48 hours to comply before legal action is pursued." She turned, heels clicking down the driveway, and climbed into her SUV with robotic grace. Mark stood there in silence, rain dripping from the eaves. Something inside him broke. That night, he called Miguel. "Tomorrow," he said, "we're not just resisting anymore. We're taking this to the people." The next day, they did just that. Mark and Miguel set up folding chairs, a microphone, and a big handmade banner that read, "This is our neighborhood, not hers," right in the middle of the cul-de-sac. One by one, neighbors stepped out of their beige homes, hesitant at first, then curious, then angry. Mark stood before them, his voice carrying across the street. "Look around. Does this look like a neighborhood or a clone factory? We used to care here. We used to laugh here. Now we're afraid to hang wind chimes because Karen might write us up." Laughter and murmurs rippled through the crowd. Karen arrived minutes later, SUV screeching to a halt. "Disperse immediately," she snapped, striding toward the gathering. This is an unauthorized meeting. But this time, no one moved. Miguel stepped forward. We're just exercising our right to free speech, Karen. Karen's face turned red. There's no free speech clause in the HOA charter. Mark smirked. Then maybe it's time there should be. Karen turned to the crowd, voice shrill. He's turning you against everything we've built. Without rules, this place will fall apart. From the crowd, an elderly woman, Mrs. Patterson, shouted, What we built, Karen, was a community. You turned it into a prison. Cheers erupted. For the first time, Karen looked uncertain. Her hand trembled slightly as she held her clipboard like a shield. Mark stepped closer, lowering his voice, but making sure everyone could hear. You can fine me, threaten me, send your inspectors. But I'm not painting over my father's work. Not for you. Not for anyone. A hush fell. The standoff hung in the humid air. A single heartbeat stretched into eternity. Then, without a word, Karen turned and stormed back to her SUV, slamming the door so hard it echoed down the street. The crowd burst into applause. For the first time, the neighborhood felt alive again. But Mark knew this wasn't over. He could see it in her eyes before she drove off, the cold glint of someone who'd lost control and wasn't done fighting. The real battle, he realized, was still ahead. Days passed in uneasy quiet. Karen vanished from public view, but her presence lingered. In every whispered conversation, every cautious glance at the greenhouse that had sparked a rebellion. The HOA board went silent, too. Meetings were postponed indefinitely. No new letters. No fines. It was like the whole system had paused, holding its breath. But Mark knew better. The calm was never the end. It was the inhale before the strike. Then, on a crisp Saturday morning, an official envelope appeared in his mailbox, certified, sealed with the HOA insignia. Final notice, mandatory board hearing, attendance required. Jenna read the letter aloud, her voice cracking. They're going to try and expel us, aren't they? Mark sighed, looking out at the street. Every beige house reflected the sunlight, sterile and hollow. But he noticed something else, small hints of rebellion. A coral-colored flower pot, a red wreath, a turquoise wind chime. The neighborhood was quietly waking up. He put on his jacket. If they want a hearing, he said, they'll get one. The community hall was packed that afternoon. Dozens of neighbors showed up, some curious, others angry, most just tired of the drama. Karen sat at the front behind a long table, her clipboard replaced with a sleek binder. Her hair was perfectly in place, her composure restored. When Mark entered, she didn't look up. Mr. Bennett, she began crisply. This hearing concerns your continued non-compliance with HOA regulations and your recent disruption of neighborhood order. Mark leaned against the podium. Neighborhood order? Or your control? A murmur rippled through the audience. Karen ignored it. You've violated multiple provisions. Because they're wrong, he interrupted. Because you're trying to turn this neighborhood into something it was never meant to be. People didn't move here for uniformity. They came here for community. Karen's voice tightened. We have rules for a reason, Mark. Rules aren't the problem, he said. You are. Gasps filled the room. Even Karen's pen faltered in her hand. He turned to face the crowd. We all followed her lead, afraid of fines, afraid of losing what we love. But in trying to keep our property values, we lost our values. Miguel stood up from the back. He's right. Look at our street. It looks like a row of coffins now. Beige coffins. Laughter broke through the tension. More people spoke up. The elderly couple from Maple Court, the young family who'd repainted their porch swing. One by one, they sided with Mark. Karen slammed her binder shut. This meeting is out of order. No, said Mrs. Patterson, rising from her seat. This is the first time it's been in order. Applause thundered through the room. Karen froze, the sound of 100 people reclaiming their voice washing over her like a tidal wave. Mark stepped closer to the table, his tone softening. Karen, you don't have to be the villain here. You love this place too, we all do. But maybe it's time we stop pretending perfection is what makes it beautiful. For a long, silent moment, Karen just stared at him. Her eyes flickered, a war between pride and exhaustion. Finally, she lowered her gaze. The next morning, the HOA board issued a simple statement. Effective immediately, the Willow Creek color policy is rescinded. Homeowners may paint their homes as they wish. Weeks later, the neighborhood transformed again, not with beige, but with life. Every house bloomed with personality. Soft blues, warm yellows, rustic reds. Children played on the sidewalks, laughter echoing through streets that finally felt like home again. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky burned orange, Mark stood on his porch, brush in hand. He was repainting the porch railing, restoring the same deep green his father once chose. Jenna stepped out beside him. "You did it," she said softly. He smiled. "We did it." Across the street, Karen's house remained beige, the last remnant of her rule. But even she had changed something. A single window shutter painted a pale lavender. A quiet peace offering. Mark chuckled, shaking his head. "Guess she's finding her color too." As twilight settled over Willow Creek, the wind rustled through the painted houses. Every shade a symbol of freedom, of voices that refused to be silenced. And for the first time in a long time, the neighborhood didn't just look perfect. It felt alive.